Good morning. My name is Tushti, and this is my husband, Surendra. And thank you for joining us. Our topic this morning, ego, friend, or foe, could represent a very intimate relationship between the soul and the physical body. That when the soul identifies with the body, the ego is born, and this great tug-of-war begins between the two of them. And Master gives us the example of the sea, the rising fall of the ego. It's rising and falling and rising and falling, trying to be recognized, trying to be seen, reaching for one desire after another. And yet just beneath the surface, in the calm depths, lies the vast ocean of spirit, Satchidananda. Satchidananda is ever present, ever conscious, ever new bliss. And that is our true nature. And Jesus said, I am of this world, not in it. And when I first stepped onto the spiritual path, I really didn't grasp the depth of it in relationship to myself, to my soul. And now I can say I rely on it, probably a little more than I should. When I feel all tangled up in God's dream and my emotions and taking myself much too seriously, I really do affirm I am in this world, not of it. Most of you know that we both work at East West Bookshop, and we have different presenters come through. And this past summer, we had a presenter, and his name was Brooks Palmer. And he wrote the book titled Clutter Busting, How to Let Go of What is Holding You Back. And essentially, the book was about just clearing all the clutter out of your house. But he actually took it a little bit deeper than that. And there was a spiritual thread woven all the way through it. Because in the very beginning, he says, things will not make you happy. And we know that from our teachings. Things will not make you happy. You are sacred. Your things are not. And so the stories that he told and the examples that he gave of his clients, who could be any one of us, it really demonstrated how the clutter we gather, it represents past memories, our habits, judgments, and maybe what other people think of us, why we think we should have these things. And when we clear all the clutter away, it creates space for change and space for clarity. And it struck me that, the physical body is no different. It's a house. It's a house of the soul. And we gather a lot of clutter. We have our self-definitions and our disappointments and our desires and all our tangled emotions, and they're sort of housed in the body. Now, it seemed like symbolically this book was speaking about the spiritual path, specifically the chakra system. And the chakras are the energetic transfer points between the soul and the body. And they represent the full spectrum of who we are. Now, you can imagine from the very worst possible thing we could be, our behavior, to the purest and the most saintly. And that spectrum and that potential resides within each and every one of us. Now, Master's teachings tell us that the seat of the ego is located at the base of the skull, that part of the brain called the medulla oblongata, which is a very interesting name. And the cosmic energy comes into the body at this point. And as it comes in, it's just energy. It has no agenda. It's just energy. And it will be drawn to that part of the spectrum that we have given the most attention to. And it's really our choice. Ego, friend, or foe, it's like, where are we sending and where are we directing the energy? And again, two choices. It's not like 31 flavors, it's really simple. It's just two. It's not chocolate and vanilla. It's soul consciousness or ego consciousness. Now, ego consciousness is when we direct the energy downward towards the lower three chakras, related to the material and the physical plane. And it's where we particularize it. We kind of cut it up into little pieces. And it's like I, me, mine, my. Swami even has a great song, I, me, mine, my. And this is a funny story that I'm going to throw in. I was recently at a trade show, and I was drawn into this booth because it was products for children, and they were very attractive. And as I got closer, what I noticed that there was something written across every one of them, and it said, "It's all about me. It's all about me. It's all about me." And I thought, no, I don't think that's for East-West. And so I just sort of backed out before the woman tried to engage me. You know, "It's all about me" is particularizing the energy, and it's just turning our gaze away from God and gathering more clutter. And, you know, that's sort of what the ego can do to us. In Swami's book, now Swami wrote a book called Sadhu Beware. And this is a very little book. And this is a very, very powerful little book. And the first time I read it, it was very daunting. I thought, God, I'm in trouble. How can I achieve this goal? And can I be that good? You know, this will take forever. This will take lifetimes. And so it will. But if you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so, because it will help you, it'll guide you. And I also to say that Swami wrote that book in 2005, and he wrote it for a new order of monks that is forming in India. And he's rewriting it for us. He's rewriting it for the householders. And you go ahead and read this present book, because it'll give you some wonderful insights on yourself. He warns us that ego transcendence is the only challenge. Ego transcendence is the only challenge on the spiritual path. And we can think about that one for a long time. And then he adds, it is the sole duty of each and every one of us to release the hold that the ego consciousness has on us. So that is a very intimate relationship. When I read the book, I thought, well, I'll take on this challenge of the ego and watch it. You know, and I know every day we try to be the best person we can possibly be. But I thought I'll try a little harder. Many years ago, there was a television program called Mission Impossible. Some of you must remember it. Well, the main character was given this mission, and he had the choice to take the mission on or not. And it was always a noble mission. And the odds of him succeeding were very dim, of completing the mission and even surviving. But again, it was a noble mission, and he always accepted it, and he always succeeded. So I'm starting on my mission, and I'm trying to step back and be the observer. And what I notice is that the ego is like a separate entity, and it has a mission of its own. It wants us to desire and reach out for things beyond our inner world. It's just always reaching outward. And so as I was watching it, I noticed that what it did, it was like it would run out in front of me, throw itself down for me to trip over. And then I would right myself and sort of notice what happened. And this can be the tiniest little thing, as even a little thought, or maybe a word that you say. But then up it comes again, running out in front of me, throwing itself down for me to trip over again. And I just kept stepping further back. And it's just like when we meditate, you know, we step behind the breath and we watch it. And I was stepping back and noticing what was going on. And, you know, when we're in our minds, everything that comes in is filtered through the clutter of past lifetimes and our karma. And when we're the observer, it's very humbling. When we're watching our thoughts, they sometimes can be entertaining. But if we step back a little further and we're watching our emotions, this, again, it's very humbling. And we sort of see what we're doing. And being the observer creates space for awareness. And again, it's space for change and expanding. Now, Swami gives us in his book ways to transcend the ego. And he says transcend. He doesn't say bury, destroy, or annihilate, because it's a part of us. He says transcend, which uplifts the energy. And he gives us step by step. And I've reread this book a number of times. And we don't have to take on the whole ego. That's almost impossible. It's overwhelming. But little tiny pieces of it. Just read one little line from that book and just sort of work on that aspect of yourself. And when we do this, again, it lifts the energy. And when we're tangled up, our vision, everything kind of closes down on us. And what we need to remember is God. One of the keys to ego transcendence that Swami mentions is practicing the presence of God. Standing in God awareness as many times of the day as we can. Because when we ask, like when we're upset and all tangled up and confused, do we go to our friends and, complain and commiserate? Or do we quietly ask, Divine Mother, help me through this. What should I do? Help me to know your will. And when we ask, it's very powerful. It uplifts the energy, not only within us, but all around us as well. And, Divine Mother's always waiting for us to ask. She's always there. And no matter what happens, if you stumble over the ego throughout the day, at the end of the day, just offer it all back. Just every aspect of it, even when you've stumbled, even when you've succeeded. And in so doing, it'll free your heart. And I'll just close with my favorite line from Master's poem, Samadhi. I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. Watch the little ego. The little ego is always a drop of the sea, and God is always embracing us because we're His very own. God bless.
Earlier this morning, we affirmed our intent to cultivate power as an aid to our spiritual development. Not many people would think of power as a tool for that purpose. Most would say it's more about greed, that it's mainly a means to manipulate other people or situations. And few, I suspect, would define it as a function of self-control. But power is self-control, as our teachings tell us, and anything else is just an abuse of that concept. Power is nonetheless a very popular theme. As Tushti mentioned, we work at East West Bookstore, and for years it seemed that every other book on our shelves was entitled The Power of Something. It started with The Power of Now, and due to the terrific success of that book by Eckhart Tolle, we soon had The Power of Abstinence, Acceptance, Affirmation, Apology, Appreciation, Attraction, Authenticity, Awareness. I kid you not, I memorized this list from our inventory database. And I haven't even gotten to the B's yet. The power of belief, breath, I won't take you through it all, right on down to yin, yang, yoga, zeal, and zen. And about the only thing that broke that trend somewhat was, number one, sort of running out of words that could reasonably be described as powerful, and also the sudden impact of The Secret. And for those who don't know, The Secret is a DVD that sold millions of copies worldwide, purporting to show us how to attract whatever it is that we want. And now, of course, there's almost an equal proliferation of books, CDs, DVDs, seminars, and probably barbecue sauce that are trying to promise us some life-changing secret. we're a funny species, aren't we? We buy into these things. And I don't mean to put these products down. In general, they have good things to teach, and if I had written a couple of them myself, I'm sure that my tithe to Ananda probably could have built the Living Wisdom School all by itself. But there is clearly a gimmick factor behind a lot of these items that is more about marketing and sales than about actual content. Power is the means to undo our materialistic conditioning. Properly applied, it's an antidote to our delusive tendencies. Improperly applied as a way to manipulate other people, to dominate or mistreat them, it becomes a delusion generator instead. And certainly there is ample evidence everywhere that would make the case for its general misuse in that respect. The significant power, the significance of power is superbly illustrated in the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna, the central heroic figure, represents the third chakra, the power center. And he struggles at first to do the right thing, literally to slay those parts of his personality that are keeping him from self-realization and eternal bliss, those myriad cousins of habits and worldly desires. In the Gita's dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna, Krishna speaking for God, and in the epic battle itself, the lesson that we see played out is that power is not a matter of physical strength or the size of one's army. It's a matter of intent, of will and dharmic intent. When the will is great, it draws forth the most important ingredient in the whole recipe, the grace of God. With renewed faith, Arjuna needed only the will to do as Krishna counseled him in order to prevail against enormous odds. And he did prevail. He and his Pandava brothers did prevail. The right kind of power is a magnet for good things happening. But its even greater purpose is the liberation of our hearts and minds from all those reactive tendencies, all those reactive behaviors that tether us to the miseries of this world. And we all seem to fall victim to it at times, of course. About a month ago, I had the honor and pleasure of interviewing on stage at East West Houston Smith, a man of 90 remarkable years who is widely celebrated as the premier authority on the world's religions. And in his new autobiography, he tells the story of an American Buddhist monk who undertook a pilgrimage on foot and in silence, walking from Los Angeles to Ukiah, far north of San Francisco. But this was no ordinary pilgrimage. In the Tibetan tradition, he would fully prostrate himself after taking every 3 steps, face down, before rising again to take 3 more steps. And the pilgrimage took 3 years. Well, you can imagine some of the rudeness that he encountered along the way, especially in crossing busy metropolitan streets, for example. In Watts, he was verbally menaced. in Beverly Hills, ridiculed by shop owners who told him to get a life, get a job, do something useful. And he never broke his silence or his focus. And Houston asked him later what he had learned. And he said that he had learned to control his urge to react when his emotions would flare suddenly with great force. He had trained himself to create within him an inner distance that would allow him to pause, even just for a moment or two, and then have the opportunity calmly to respond from a place of higher consciousness. Think of the power in that. Isn't that what freedom from our conditioning is all about? And isn't that what Swami Kriyananda has been modeling for us for as long as we have known him? That is what power is all about. And when we are no longer slaves to our impulses, when we give ourselves the time, even just a moment, to reflect, we become the masters of our lives when we can take that to a spiritual advantage. The masters of our lives instead of merely characters like pinballs that careen from bumper to bumper, from one little drama to the next. Well, any discussion of power would probably be incomplete without mentioning ego, and as we have seen conveniently, our subject this morning is ego, friend or foe. The ego, of course, is that which initially motivates us to develop skills, to improve our minds, and even to seek deeper fulfillment in our lives. But when it falls into the grip of material desires and other delusions, it does become the relentless opponent of our souls seeking freedom in God. There is an image that I have found helpful at times, an image that speaks to me of God, and I would like to close by sharing that with you. As many of you know, Tushti and I lived at Ananda, Seattle, in the community there before we moved to Ananda's community here. And the Seattle community is located several miles north of where the temple used to be and where we had our separate businesses. The drive south on Interstate 5 is certainly one of the more picturesque highway commutes that you can take. It's lined along the way frequently with majestic evergreen trees. And at about a halfway mark, the road takes a curve to the east, and you are suddenly facing a scene that just takes your breath away every time. A spectacular, freestanding, snow-capped mountain rising 14,000 feet in the air, Mount Rainier. There is no photograph that can compare to that visual experience. It is simply glorious. But Seattle being where it is in the misty Pacific Northwest, most of the time you don't see that mountain at all. In fact, you may not see it for weeks or even months at a stretch, but you know it is there. And it is casting its aura over the physical landscape, over the landscape of your soul, ready to take your breath away again whenever that veil is lifted. That scene to me is a great reminder of God's presence in our lives, whether or not we see His work in all of the events and eventualities that we experience. God is there, inspiring us and supporting us as we walk along the path that leads to Him, correcting us when we stray. It is His strength that becomes our own when we attune ourselves to His will, and His that we abuse when we turn our attention to lesser ambitions and worldly desires. I love that image, and I invite you to use it, or one that speaks to you as an inspiration in your life. In today's culture, which is so committed to ego cultivation, self-control is frequently a daunting challenge. But keep that glorious mountain in mind, however it appears to you in reality or imagination. And bring it into view as you take each curve in the road of your life's travels. Let its majesty become you, because that is what you are. God bless.